Shiki was just an average delinquent who had been expelled from school, but when a mysterious stranger attacked him and killed his father, he discovered the truth. He had demon blood in his veins. Determined to master his powers, he vowed to take revenge. Long ago, a race of demons called Oni roamed Japan, destroying everything and killing humans without remorse. No one dared to stand against them. But then a brave man named Momotaro rose as humanity's savior. He launched an assault on the Oni stronghold, killing thousands of them. That marked the beginning of a long and bitter war between Momotaro and the Oni, a war that still raged on in modern times. Unaware that this ancient legend was tied to his own fate, a teenager named Shiki was casually cleaning his firearm collection. He was chatting with a friend on the phone. He laughed about recently getting expelled from school due to a fight. He joked that he didn't even care. He was sick of seeing his classmates' ugly faces every day. At that moment, his adoptive father, Tsuyoshi, arrived and smacked him on the head, demanding an explanation for his expulsion. Shiki told him to back off, and when Tsuyoshi raised his hand again, Shiki dodged him. Tsuyoshi then questioned the presence of all the guns, pointing out that they ran a wine shop, not a gun store. Shiki shot back, mocking the failing wine shop and claiming everyone knew business was bad. Tsuyoshi clapped back, accusing Shiki of acting arrogant despite being expelled. Taking it personally, Shiki shouted that he would never become a loser like Tsuyoshi and was glad they weren't blood-related. The words stung, but Tsuyoshi said nothing and went downstairs to take a business call. Soon after, Tsuyoshi left for a delivery. Alone again, Shiki sighed, wishing a rich man had adopted him instead. He returned to his shooting practice but was startled by an explosion outside. When he stepped out to investigate, a dense fog obscured his view. Suddenly, a blast of black mist shot from the fog, knocking him back. The mist coiled around his leg and dragged him onto the street. As he got up trying to process what was happening, a terrifying old man in white appeared, ready to attack. Just then, Tsuyoshi returned and rammed his car into the man, yelling for Shiki to get in. Tsuyoshi drove as fast as he could, declaring that their only option was to flee the country. Shiki, still confused, questioned how he could just kill a man like that. But Tsuyoshi told him the man wasn't dead and they needed to get far away. Clearly distressed, Tsuyoshi warned Shiki that there wasn't much time and urged him to listen carefully. He revealed that Shiki was a descendant of the Oni, and the man who had attacked them was a descendant of Momotaro. Shiki thought it was a joke, but Tsuyoshi insisted he was serious. Just then, a black mist blade pierced the car's roof, and Tsuyoshi barely avoided it. Realizing their attacker had caught up, the car windows were suddenly engulfed by black mist, completely blinding them. Tsuyoshi stopped the car near an abandoned warehouse, got out quickly, and ordered Shiki to hide. Moments later, the car exploded. When Tsuyoshi turned around, Shiki was gone. But a trail of black mist led into the warehouse, and Tsuyoshi rushed inside, knowing his son had been taken there. Inside, Shiki was suspended in a web of black mist, confronted by a terrifying figure named Samadare. Samadare declared that Shiki's Oni blood made him nothing but a pest, and that exterminating pests was the duty of the Momotaro agency. Shiki couldn't believe Samadare had survived being hit by a car. Just then, Tsuyoshi arrived, stating that the fairy tale of Momotaro was real. For thousands of years, descendants of Momotaro and Oni had battled each other. Eventually, the Momotaro bloodline formed the Momotaro agency, tipping the scales and forcing the Oni to hide among humans. Still in disbelief, Shiki struggled to understand what was happening. Tsuyoshi told him to let him handle it. Samadare summoned 2 swords made of black mist. In response, Tsuyoshi unleashed the same ability, preparing to fight. The two charged at each other, clashing blades with a powerful shockwave. Tsuyoshi managed to push Samadare back, but Samadare taunted him, saying he had grown weaker. He explained that the black mist was a power unique to Momotaro's descendants and revealed that Tsuyoshi was once his senior. Shiki was stunned to learn his father was a Momotaro descendant. Tsuyoshi replied that he had abandoned that life. Samadare asked if he had also forgotten how dangerous the Oni were. Then he condemned Tsuyoshi for protecting an Oni and declared that he too would be eliminated. Tsuyoshi launched the first attack, but the two were evenly matched. Shiki watched in awe as the two exchanged blows. Samadare demanded to know why Tsuyoshi was defending a creature born for destruction. Tsuyoshi told him to shut up and fought harder, but Samadare was faster. He dodged the next strike and countered with a rapid flurry of blows, seriously wounding Tsuyoshi and knocking him unconscious. Shiki, horrified by the sight of his bleeding father, cursed Samadare and vowed to kill him. Samadare coldly informed him that he would soon join his father in death. But then Tsuyoshi grabbed his attacker's leg. Samadare asked why he would go so far for a demon child. Tsuyoshi replied that he didn't need a reason to protect his son. Shiki hadn't hurt anyone, and killing him for his bloodline was wrong. Samadare raised his black mist sword to finish him off, but Shiki's rage finally reached its peak. His eyes turned crimson, blood streamed from every pore, and demonic horns sprouted from his head. He roared his intent to kill Samadare, and the web restraining him shattered. Samadare turned and was stunned to see that Shiki had escaped. A barrage of blood-made guns appeared beside him, and Samadare barely blocked the attack. But Shiki had already vanished. Blood dripped from the rafters, revealing Shiki, now hanging upside down like a demented version of Batman. Seeing his transformation, Samadare realized Shiki had awakened and could now control his blood. But that wasn't the most terrifying part of fighting an Oni. Suddenly, Shiki lunged at him, knocking him back. Samadare quickly countered, slicing off Shiki's arm, but Shiki leaped away and instantly regenerated the limb. Screaming like a man possessed, he launched another assault. Samadare began to sweat. Understanding that this would not be an easy fight, Shiki manifested countless blood-forged guns, forcing Samadare to use his full strength and speed to deflect the bullets. Then unexpectedly, Shiki fired a blood missile. Samadare narrowly dodged, the explosion detonating behind him. Now on the defensive, Samadare fled from Shiki's relentless attack and hurled his sword in desperation, but it wasn't enough. Shiki caught up to him and kicked him hard, sending him flying. Weakened and unable to move quickly, Samadare was pinned to the ground. Shiki stepped on his face and unloaded a brutal hail of blood bullets. Though grievously wounded, Samadare barely escaped with his life. Cursing Shiki, he prepared for another round, but Shiki suddenly collapsed. The blood gun shattered and his transformation vanished. Staring at his bloody hands, Shiki broke down in confusion and horror over what he had become. Samadare, recognizing this as a typical response to awakening Oni powers, gathered his strength. He conjured another black mist sword to finish the job. But just before the blade struck, Tsuyoshi threw himself in the way, sacrificing his life to protect Shiki. Samadare demanded to know how he could risk everything to protect someone who had become a monster. Tsuyoshi, thinking of Shiki as the sweet little boy he raised, told his old friend that being a father, even for a short while, wasn't a bad thing. Hearing the explosions, nearby civilians gathered and called emergency services. Samadare chose to retreat, dissolving into black mist and disappearing, leaving the injured Tsuyoshi and devastated Shiki behind. Panicking, Shiki told his father he would call an ambulance, but Tsuyoshi asked him not to. He knew the end had come and wanted one last conversation with his son. Tsuyoshi confessed that he had never told Shiki about his Oni heritage because it would have meant revealing the danger he faced. Now with no other choice, he urged Shiki to grow strong enough to defeat both Momotaro and the Oni, so he could live in peace and freedom. But Shiki refused to accept it. He shouted for him to shut up and insisted they would talk once he recovered. Tsuyoshi smiled faintly, then breathed his last. As he crumpled to the ground, Shiki broke. He shook his father, begging him to wake up, then broke down in uncontrollable sobs. Just then, a man on roller skates arrived. Without a word, he knocked Shiki unconscious with a gentle tap and carried him away to a place where Oni like him could become stronger. While he was unconscious, Shiki dreamed of the happy moments when he used to play in the park under his father's watchful eyes. But then the dream abruptly turned dark, showing Tsuyoshi dying at the hands of Samadare. Shiki jolted awake, staring into the bloodshot eyes of Samadare. But as he looked around, he found himself gagged and tied to a chair in a large, empty hall. Right behind him, the skater guy who had kidnapped him was doing one-arm handstand push-ups with his umbrella. As soon as he noticed Shiki was awake, he returned to his feet. The edgelord introduced himself as Nato, a fellow Oni, and immediately manifested his horns. Shiki was too overwhelmed by everything around him and couldn't even focus on what Nato was saying. Nato refused to reveal where they were, but informed Shiki that his father's body was safely stored elsewhere. He explained that he had brought Shiki here for retrieval and evaluation. Nato then skated over to a whiteboard in the corner, dragging it closer to Shiki and boasting about how efficient roller skates were compared to walking. He began explaining the Momotaro agency, mentioning that Shiki had already encountered someone capable of manipulating the black mist as a weapon. The Momotaro agency existed to find and hunt Oni, and in response, the Oni created their own agency to fight back. Nato explained that his role was to locate newly awakened Oni, like Shiki, and bring them to a safe location to assess whether they were worthy of joining the Oni agency. With that brief introduction complete, he returned the whiteboard to its place and removed Shiki Sip's gag to begin the interview. As soon as the gag came off, Shiki yelled at him to release him. He also cursed Nato, threatening to kill him if he had harmed his father's body. Nato instantly deducted a point from Shiki's score, which had already started at 0. He called Shiki a moron for not understanding what safely stored meant, even though he had explained it just moments earlier. Shiki, growing angrier, insisted there was no way he could trust a shady edgelord like Nato. Nato admitted he hadn't expected anything else from someone like him. He decided to deduct more points each time Shiki cursed or demanded to be released, warning him to cooperate if he wanted to pass the evaluation. Shiki didn't care about the evaluation, he only wanted to be freed quickly, so he tried to contain his anger. However, he failed even at that, and Nato told him to stop giving him that creepy look. Hearing that, Shiki snapped. Nato decided to switch to a non-standard method of evaluation, reasoning that normal approaches didn't work on nut jobs. He took off his tie, and before Shiki could grasp what was happening, Nato used the tie to strangle him with full strength. As Shiki panicked, struggling for breath, Nato explained that a creature's true nature was revealed when it neared death, something he wanted to see. Shiki tried to fight back with all his strength, but he couldn't escape the chokehold, even as blood began dripping from every orifice on his face. Eventually, he lost consciousness. Nato appeared disappointed in him, but the blood Shiki had just lost began to awaken with power. It transformed into sharp spikes and lunged at Nato, who easily dodged the attack. Suddenly, a Gatling gun formed from blood pointed at Nato's head, and behind it, Shiki stood in his berserker state. He opened fire on Nato and retreated once satisfied. However, none of the attacks had reached Nato, who had shielded himself by coating his umbrella with his own blood. Nato deducted 100 points from Shiki's score, criticizing him for not even knowing how to use his Oni blood. He decided to demonstrate how it was properly done, even though Shiki wouldn't remember anything once the berserker state ended. Shiki lunged at him again, but Nato was fully prepared. Moments later, Shiki regained consciousness, lying defeated on the floor. He couldn't understand what had just happened, but upon seeing his bloodied hands, he panicked, realizing he had lost control once more. Nato, calmly sitting on top of him, explained that memory lapses were natural in berserker mode, as Oni lost their minds during it. The hall around them was a mess from the aftermath of their fight. Shiki told Nato to stop lecturing him when he was also using his blood as a weapon. Nato dismissed his blood umbrella and clarified that he never went berserk because he had control over his powers. He then declared that there was nothing more to discuss. Shiki had failed the test to join the Oni agency. Shiki still didn't understand what was going on, but one thing was clear: Nato was ridiculously strong. He swallowed his pride and begged Nato to take him in as an underling so he could grow stronger and avenge his father. Nato immediately refused, telling him that reckless fighters who didn't use their brains were the first to die in real battles. He called Shiki a useless disgrace who couldn't control either his mind or his power. Shiki fought to hold back his rage. Nato then declared it was time to dispose of Shiki, as a berserk Oni was a danger to everyone. He used a special ring to cut his thumb and let a stream of blood drip out. The blood formed into an umbrella, and Shiki suddenly came up with a plan to make Nato change his mind. He ran out of Nato's range, dragging his fist on the ground until it bled, then dashed toward him. Nato turned his umbrella into a spiked shield to block any close-range attacks and calculated Shiki's potential moves. Shiki jumped at the last moment, one of the options Nato anticipated, but then used his blood spikes to launch himself sideways and pointed a blood gun directly at Nato's face. He focused everything on the gun and fired a powerful shot, the recoil blasting him backward. He thought he had finally managed to land a hit on Nato, but once again, he had failed. Nato effortlessly blocked the blood bullet with his finger and shattered it. He gave Shiki no credit, stating that he had nearly entered berserker mode just to launch the attack. As Shiki began losing control again, Nato decided to finish things with his special move. He created a protective cage and summoned blood archers ready to fire on his command. But then he noticed Shiki fighting back against his berserker instincts and slowly gaining control of his power. Nato canceled his special move. Shiki felt proud of managing to control his power, but he collapsed from exhaustion. Nato was astonished. Not only had Shiki regained control, but he had also suppressed his berserker state, which was a rare feat. He asked how Shiki managed to do that, and Shiki smugly responded that Nato would have to accept him as his underling if he wanted the answer. Nato replied that he would think about it, which Shiki took as a yes. Shiki explained that he hadn't understood anything about controlling blood when Nato first mentioned it. But when he saw Nato slice his thumb and form a weapon, he got an idea. He figured that since they were both Oni, he could copy Nato's method. Surprisingly, it had worked. He admitted that he didn't understand the finer details. He had just let his arm bleed and mentally shouted at it to form a weapon. Still buzzing from his success, he asked Nato what he thought of his approach. Nato replied that it was complete nonsense. That wasn't how things worked at all. In his experience, emotional and reckless teens like Shiki struggled to control their blood, while calm, rational individuals like himself had better chances of success. He observed that Shiki neither listened to reason nor let his berserker instincts take full control. Instead, he used raw instinct to force his power to obey him. It was a rough method, but one that could potentially unleash explosive strength. As Nato pondered what to do with this unique case, Shiki spoke up again, saying that he needed power to avenge his father and kill the man responsible. He told Nato that if he trained him and taught him everything, he would eventually become useful. But Nato refused, saying that people like Shiki were a danger to society, especially since he didn't yet even know he had powers and had gambled his life using them. He turned his umbrella into a spear and acted like he was about to stab Shiki, but struck the floor beside his head instead. He told Shiki that he wouldn't accept him as an underling, but as a student. Shiki was confused by the distinction, thinking they were the same thing. Nato clarified that Shiki had barely passed the test, and he would now be given the chance to prove himself. Since Shiki was lost again, Nato decided to explain things from the beginning. He revealed that they were on an island called Hell's Doorstep, previously known as Onigashima. It had once been the site of a massacre led by the original Mamatero, but now it served as a sanctuary for Oni. At the island's center was Rosetsu Academy, a military school that trained Oni to fight against the Mamatero agency. Shiki was alarmed to hear they were on an island, but Nato poked him and told him that detail wasn't important. What mattered was that Rosetsu Academy would teach him everything: general education, Oni blood control, combat skills, and the historical conflict between Oni and Mamatero. Nato was Shiki's homeroom teacher, and although he continued to explain how the academy worked, it was all too much for Shiki to process. Shiki didn't care about the details, he just wanted to know if he could become strong enough to avenge his dad. Nato couldn't guarantee anything. He warned that if Shiki failed to become powerful enough to fight the Mamatero agency, he would be expelled. Soon, Shiki got dressed in the academy uniform and seemed excited about starting a new kind of school. But Nato warned him that others had passed the entrance test this year, and Shiki was likely the least skilled among them. Suddenly, Shiki remembered his father and asked about the location of his body. Nato answered that it was being kept in the morgue so Shiki could hold a funeral in accordance with his beliefs. As Shiki grew somber thinking about his father's death, Nato called him a gloomy idiot and told him to focus solely on getting stronger so he could get revenge. Shiki said that Nato seemed like a nice guy after all, which embarrassed Nato. He sped away, warning that if Shiki didn't reach class before him, he would be expelled. Shiki somehow caught up, and as he contemplated the coolest way to enter the classroom and earn some aura, Nato just kicked him through the door. Shiki felt like he had just earned aura debt from such an uncool entry. He turned to the masked boy named Jin and asked for tissues for his nosebleed. Jin, who turned out to be an even bigger edgelord than their teacher, coldly told him to stop talking. Shiki got annoyed and teased Jin for not having his horns yet. Jin then manifested his horns, stating that only foolish rookies flaunted them all the time. That remark offended another student named Ikari, who also couldn't control his horns. Tensions quickly rose in the classroom as Shiki and Jin stood toe to toe. Before the situation could escalate, Nato suddenly appeared behind them, and Shiki found himself sitting next to Jin without realizing how it happened. Jin was just as surprised, but Nato didn't care what his students thought. For their first lesson, he announced they would play a game of tag. He brought all the students to the forest and told them they had 1 hour to return to the school building while avoiding capture. He added that anyone who failed to return within the time limit would be expelled. He dismissed Shiki's objections without a second thought. Nato explained that students were free to use their powers, while he would only use his own if someone went berserk. Jin remarked that he might be killed if he didn't use his powers, and Nato said he had no issue with that. He explained that anyone who managed to kill him would instantly graduate and gain the freedom to join any squad fighting against the Momotaro agency. He concluded by reminding them that the academy existed to prepare them for real-life challenges and that he would test them at every step. When he asked if they were ready, Shiki replied that he was going to give it his all and ace the test. Nato then revealed that there was another rule and pulled out 2 balls. He informed the students that they would need to possess a ball upon reaching the academy in order to pass the test. Without warning, he threw the balls into the restricted area. The students assumed that, since there were only 2 balls, a fight would break out over them. However, Nato clarified that they would be divided into teams. The first team consisted of Shiki, Jin, and the timid, pink-haired girl named Homer. The second team was made up of the delinquent Ikari and the nerdy Juji, while the third group included the anxious Roku and Kuina, who appeared to be the most confident among them. Nato informed the 3 teams that he would enter the restricted zone 15 minutes after them to give them a head start. Shiki interrupted him, expressing his reluctance to team up with the masked weirdo. Nato warned him that he would be expelled if he couldn't work in a team, which forced Shiki to withdraw his complaint. After that, Homer politely introduced herself to Shiki, who had never interacted with a girl in his entire life. Seeing her approach gave him butterflies, and he confidently promised to protect her. She became flustered and told him that he didn't need to go that far, she just didn't want to be a burden. She then introduced herself to Jin, but he, being an edgy Tate fan, completely ignored her. Her low self-esteem kicked in, and she began crying and apologizing for speaking to him like a crybaby. Shiki yelled at Jin for hurting her feelings, then turned back to comfort Homer, saying she shouldn't ruin her cute face with tears. He returned to taunt Jin, who responded by calling him a beta simp. Their argument was interrupted by Nato, who told them to head inside since they didn't have all day. Jin and Shiki immediately ran toward the restricted forest, and after a moment of hesitation, Homer followed them. Inside the forest, Jin jumped from tree to tree like a monkey, thinking about how killing Nato would allow him to graduate and join any squad he wanted. He planned to use the opportunity to return to the front lines and confront his greatest enemy again. But suddenly, Shiki launched a surprise attack from behind, breaking Jin out of his thoughts. Jin asked what was wrong with him, and Shiki declared that he wanted to prove he was stronger. Jin welcomed the challenge and removed his mask, revealing terrible scars around his mouth because he wanted to copy Togi Inumaki. Shiki was creeped out and called him weak for flaunting old wounds, but Jin did not respond to the provocation. Instead, he removed his gloves, showing hands covered in stitch marks. Tearing one of the stitches, he let out blood and shaped it into circular saws. Shiki was stunned, thinking the author of Chainsaw Man might sue them for copying his idea. Jin told him to run away if he was scared, but Shiki said he couldn't. He had to avenge his father's death. This caught Jin off guard. However, Jin's demeanor turned menacing as he said they would never understand each other. Shiki replied that he didn't want to understand him anyway and bit his thumb to release blood, but he failed to turn it into a gun and panicked, unsure what to do. With no other option, he grabbed a stick to defend himself, but quickly realized he was no match for Jin, who cut down trees with a single strike of his chainsaw arms. Meanwhile, Homer was trying to find the two boys when she heard loud thuds from trees falling. She panicked, believing she didn't belong in a place like this. Then she remembered Shiki calling her cute and decided to look for him, unaware that she was only a few feet away from one of the balls. At the same time, Shiki was desperately trying to fight Jin with bare fists. Jin didn't even activate his chainsaw powers and still overpowered him easily. Shiki wondered how Jin could control his powers so effortlessly, then realized that Jin's ability was different from his or Nato's. Lost in thought like always, he left himself vulnerable, and Jin knocked him down with a single punch. Shiki felt frustrated and Jin walked away, telling him to cry in peace. However, Shiki got back on his feet, declaring that the fight wasn't over. The annoyed Jin launched a chainsaw attack at him just as Homer arrived. Oblivious to the danger due to her negative survival instincts, she walked straight into the line of fire. Shiki panicked and managed to pull her to safety, sustaining a slight injury. Rising from on top of her, he demanded that Jin apologize, but Jin coldly replied that it would have been her fault if she died from such a weak attack. Shiki grew furious, but then he heard Homer repeatedly chanting an apology like a prayer. He told her it wasn't her fault, but she was in a trance and suddenly began bleeding from her nose. The blood took the shape of a giant human, prompting both Jin and Shiki to panic and compare the sight to something out of Attack on Titan. Just how many anime's idea did they take? Anyway, Homer urged them to run, saying her female Titan was going to kill them. The Titan slammed into the ground with full force, and Shiki narrowly dodged the attack. Jin jumped toward the Titan to fight, but his chainsaws barely scratched its massive body. Shiki asked Homer if she could stop the creature, but she tearfully admitted that she couldn't. She then collapsed from blood loss. Shiki decided to get her away from the Titan to help, but was shocked to see the Titan protecting her. Even Jin questioned whether Homer's blood had a will of its own. Suddenly, the Titan began vomiting blood violently. Jin hid behind a rock while Shiki took the full brunt of the spray. A crying Homer asked the Titan to stop, calling it her elder sister. Shiki got up, confused by the term. Homer again pleaded for him to run, but he refused, stating that she would die from blood loss if he didn't help her. He said he never wanted to watch anyone else die again. The female Titan let out a powerful roar and the shockwave reached the students outside the forest. From a treetop, Nato watched the scene unfold, deciding to let Shiki and Jin handle Homer's blood release ability for now. Back at the battle, Shiki injured himself to draw blood and tried to use it as a weapon, but nothing happened. The Titan attacked and he dodged, but she then hurled rocks at him. One hit its mark and sent him flying. What hurt most, however, was the realization of how weak he had become. He had never lost a fight before and now felt like a useless brat. He began to cry out of frustration. Jin then stepped forward to join the battle, telling Shiki to go home if he was going to cry like a baby. Shiki angrily insisted he was just sweating from his eyes, but Jin didn't entertain the argument. He opened his wounds again and formed 2 different chainsaws on each arm. Although still injured from the Titan's previous attack, he was determined to win. Nato observed from afar and was impressed that Jin could create 2 different weapons simultaneously. He began explaining that Oni blood could take any form the user imagined, often influenced by trauma, preferences, and experiences. Meanwhile, Jin charged at the female Titan, using his circular chainsaw to scale her body. He attempted a Levi-style attack on the Titan's neck, but she sacrificed an arm to block the strike. While Jin battled the Titan, Shiki shouted at his hand to produce something. He wondered why he couldn't manifest a weapon when Jin could. Then realized that Jin only created cutting weapons, and Homer had a deep emotional connection with her Titan. He concluded that he could create guns because of his strong affection for them more than the average American. In that moment, he figured out how to control his power. On the other side, Jin struggled as the Titan let out a deafening roar that burst his eardrums. He lost his balance and thought he might die. Understanding he was not the MC, even NATO prepared to intervene, but Shiki declared he would take the fight from there. He aimed a powerful grenade launcher at the Titan, and NATO was impressed by his breakthrough. Shiki was thrilled to try his new weapon, but the Titan launched another attack. He dodged and fired a grenade which exploded on impact and blew the Titan apart, proving he is the main character. Both Jin and NATO were stunned by the sheer force of his power. But that was where the video ended. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.